On a Thursday night in May 2015, the returning officer in Richmond, North Yorkshire, announced the result. Rishi Sunak had become an MP and part of a Conservative election victory.
The choice is in your hands.
Early the next year, Prime Minister David Cameron called a referendum on Brexit.
My recommendation is clear.
He wanted to stay in the EU, but Rishi Sunak didn't. He wanted out. The UK wanted out too. David Cameron would resign. 6 years later, Rishi Sunak was Chancellor. He'd been loyal to Boris Johnson until the scandals became too much. He resigned, saying he didn't agree with Mr. Johnson's approach. A summer leadership contest followed, and time and again, Rishi Sunak contrasted his message with his opponents.
I've said the things that I believe our country needs to hear.
He lost, but Liz Truss would come and go. And now Rishi Sunak is Prime Minister. He's the leader who thinks his plan is the right one for the country. He's the leader who has to persuade his colleagues to agree. Hello, welcome. Now, last week when we started this series, the Prime Minister had just resigned. This time we have a new Prime Minister, and also last week I was telling you the Home Secretary had just resigned. Well, now she's the new Home Secretary. So we're doing our best to keep up. I'll take you through all of that, but we're not just talking about UK politics, because protests are spreading in Iran again. We'll update you there. We have to talk about this too, because we're all still asking exactly what did happen to Hu Jintao. But before all of that, we've got to come back to Westminster and start at the top.
We're just hearing that Boris Johnson is not going to stand.
Penny Mordaunt is out.
Rishi Sunak is therefore elected as leader.
I will work day in, day out to deliver for the British people.
It's our old friend, the lectern.
I believe in the British people, and I know that brighter days lie ahead. Thank you.
They can't just keep doling out prime ministers every month.
I will unite our country.
He is Prime Minister. His task, colossal.
Rishi Sunak is now the Prime Minister. Go figure.
There's a lot for Rishi Sunak to think about. Party management, his mandate, and above all, there's this.
Right now, our country is facing a profound economic crisis.
That crisis is in part because of his predecessor Liz Truss's decisions. And this is how the new Prime Minister is plotting a way out of it.
I will place economic stability and confidence at the heart of this government's agenda.
In other words, doing everything possible to reassure the financial markets, the same markets which stopped Liz Truss. And if that's one objective, we've heard others too.
A stronger NHS, better schools, safer streets.
That all costs money at a time when the government has to find billions in savings. And there was also this commitment.
The government I lead will not leave the next generation, your children and grandchildren, with a debt to settle that we were too weak to pay ourselves.
So we have managing government debt whilst improving public services and reassuring the markets. That's a lot to balance. And I had some questions at this point about how does Rishi Sunak do that? What are his options? I took those questions to Simon Jack. Hi Simon, all right?
Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry, I'm on my scruff.
Not at all. Absolutely not at all. Right, Simon, so we've seen Liz Truss try the low tax route and we know what happened there. So presumably that option is off the table. So what are the options available to Rishi Sunak and his Chancellor now?
Well, his first priority is to
sustain the confidence of the market. The good news is the government borrowing costs are going down, and that is so important. If you can bring the cost of government borrowing down, the hole that you're trying to fill gets smaller and smaller. His options, though, are limited in the sense that if he's going to make those sums add up, at some point, eventually, you can only do that two ways. You either do it through tax rises or you do it through spending cuts. But the word eventually is really important. There is no need for him to do something immediately. People are talking about these massive...
Yes, we're not going to see an NHS budget cut tomorrow or...
No, we're not going to see big tax rises or spending cuts, probably this side of an election. He'll set out his plan over the next 5 years. And what usually happens is that it is Treasury, Finance Ministry, sleight of hand to do all the big changes at the back end of that process. There's an economic reason for doing that, which is you don't want to suck money out of the economy right now because government spending is a big part of GDP. And secondly, he's got an election in 2024, so very convenient politically to push the pain beyond that date.
Thanks, Simon.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers.
Yes.
Now, those are some of Rishi Sunak's policy options, but whatever plans he settles on, the fact that it's coming off the back of years of political turmoil makes actually getting those policies in place harder. Here's how. It is all change again. The Departments of Transport, Education, Work and Pensions are just 3 of 11 departments with new ministers in charge. These departments are staffed by civil servants. They run the country. They implement government policies. That, though, can be harder to do if ministers keep changing at a record pace. We asked the Institute for Government to look at this with us. This chart shows the number of cabinet appointments each year. The red years had general elections. 2022 has had more than twice as many changes as any previous year. And this chart shows how long chancellors have stayed in post. Normally, it's years. Jeremy Hunt is the 4th in 4 months. And this is education. Since 2010, there have been 10 education secretaries. One of them, Michelle Donnellan, lasted less than 36 hours. And all of this chopping and changing has consequences.
It's slowing and it's destabilising. It makes it really, really difficult to take forward some of those sort of long-term policy developments.
Perhaps because of this, Rishi Sunak was urged to draw on experience. Rachel Wolfe wrote the 2019 Conservative Manifesto, and on Monday she advised there's no time for ministers to learn new briefs. If they were competent, put them back. Well, after a few weeks out, Dominic Raab, Steve Barclay and Michael Gove are back in the jobs they held under Boris Johnson. They and others bring some continuity. And after 5 Tory governments in 6 years, both the Prime Minister and civil servants may be hoping that continues. As we've just seen, the Cabinet connects to the civil service, but it also very much connects to the party, a Conservative party that Rishi Sunak needs to keep happy. And so around the table, we see MPs from different wings of the party. And one decision has attracted an awful lot of attention. Last week, we were talking about Suella Braverman resigning as Home Secretary over a data breach. Well, now she's back in the same job. Labour's unimpressed.
It was a grubby deal that he struck in order to get over the line and become Prime Minister.
It's not just Labour. This is Jake Berry, who was Conservative Party chairman till just a few days ago.
From my own knowledge, there were multiple breaches of the ministerial code. In fact, from multiple breaches of the ministerial code.
And if that's the previous party chairman, this is the current one.
This Prime Minister looked at the detail of this case and he believes in second chances, and he's giving Suella Braverman that second chance.
As we can see, party management is an ongoing challenge. And even if the Prime Minister gets his MPs on side, there's the public too. According to one poll, 62% of people want a general election now. The opposition parties agree.
Why doesn't he put it to the test? Let working people have their say and call a general election.
There should be a general election now.
The idea that he can go 2 years before seeking or winning a democratic mandate, I think, is just unthinkable.
And so Rishi Sunak has to make his case to the party and to the country. There's no better time to set tone and direction than a Prime Minister's first week. And I asked Salma Shah to help me assess how Rishi Sunak has gone about this. Salma's a Conservative strategist and a former advisor to Sajid Javid. How have you been enjoyed this week compared with the last?
My stress levels have come down somewhat.
To be able to serve the party I love and give back to the country I owe so much to.
I saw several people of colour on Twitter saying, why is it he has to say I owe this country so much?
We now need stability.
I think there's always the sense that actually, you know, even as second generation immigrants, there was a choice to come here and there's an acceptance, and, you know, unlike lots of European countries, you can thrive in Britain if you're an ethnic minority. You can belong to the establishment, as Rishi Sunak absolutely does.
We simply cannot afford to be a low-growth country.
I just don't think that this is at all reflective of the fact that her premiership has been a total failure.
It means lower taxes.
Do you know what? She's got to now carry on with the rest of her life, having been the shortest-serving Prime Minister in history. So I just think politicians that don't show a bit of humility afterwards, really, you know, the message is quite insufferable.
I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country.
I see, that's classy. In his leadership campaign, the reason he didn't get there, largely in my view, is because he didn't tell that positive story about growth, and that's where her vision, as it were, her ability to communicate a vision of a greater Britain, actually sort of stumped him, ultimately, I think, with the membership.
Thank you.
No smiling.
Not a very fun occasion, is it? If you looked at the hand wave, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Cheer up, Rishi.
There isn't the mandate, really, that exists from an election. He's the third Prime Minister since 2019. He knows he's going in there with a lot of MPs not being fully supportive of him and not having the membership on side. So there is so little room for him to manoeuvre that the way that he's presented himself is almost as sort of bland as you could be.
Was his Home Secretary right to resign last week for a breach of security?
She accepted her mistake. She'll be focused on cracking down on criminals.
He seemed to know what was coming.
Yeah.
Those questions weren't just off the cuff. He
was deft.
He had them loaded.
But here's the interesting thing, right? So a lot of people were always worried about the fact that you'd have Rishi versus Keir. And apart from the fact that one of them is from a minority background, they're actually quite similar, you know, competent technocrats and quite studied. I mean, like, even their haircuts are similar, you know, it's quite funny. So it's not sort of inconceivable that he would get the way that Keir Starmer thinks about this.
The Tories have crashed the economy and now somebody has to pay for their mess.
See what I mean about the hair?
I say it shouldn't be working people who've been hammered time and again by this lot.
You're going to have this huge black hole, fiscal black hole, that is going to have to be filled with cuts. And presenting that in the Commons is going to be phenomenally difficult, and also trying to put a positive spin on it is going to be phenomenally difficult. So the only way that they can really go is the acceptance that this is going to be a difficult time, but all they can do is make the right tough choices.
Is it possible for one person coming in to fundamentally shift the dynamics inside a party?
If you accept that perception is a big part of reality, you can make yourself believe that things are going to be better, and you can push yourself behind that positivity. And ultimately, what are general election campaigns? Ultimately, what is political communication? It's making perception reality.
As we've been seeing, Rishi Sunak has highlighted the economic challenges that the UK faces, and in a few minutes, I'll get into where Brexit fits into that. Before that, though, let's talk about the protests in Iran, because this story is far from finished. Something extraordinary is happening in Iran. At the grave of a young woman who died last month after being in custody, thousands gathered on Wednesday. They're part of something bigger. Through Wednesday night, protests grew across the country. And this is a movement driven by Iranian women.
6 weeks on, and many Iranian women are already living a different life. They refuse to wear the headscarf when they go out in public, and they continue to fight.
This is Tehran in May. This is Tehran this week. Not wearing a headscarf is illegal for Iranian women. More and more women, though, are ignoring that. Something that was unthinkable weeks ago. And every night, people still open their windows and chant "Death to the dictator," a message they're aiming at Iran's supreme leader. These protests were sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini. She was 22. She's buried in Saqqez in the northwest of Iran. And with Wednesday marking 40 days since her death, security forces tried to block access to the city. It didn't work.
I have never been as hopeful as I am today. Woman, life, freedom. Zan, zendegi, azadi.
And all of these protests and acts of defiance come at a cost. Videos on social media, verified by the BBC, show people being beaten by security officials. Here, we see women without headscarves defying police. In this video, security forces gathered at a girls' school in Tehran on Monday. One of them shouts, "We have permission. Beat them. Beat them all." Now, nationwide, one human rights group estimates that more than 13,000 people have been arrested and that at least 250 have been killed. Knowing all of this, last weekend, thousands of Iranians assembled in Berlin to demand change.
Our dreams signal the collapse of this empire of fear, crimes against humanity and corruption as the pillars that hold Ali Khamenei.
This is a direct challenge to Iran's Islamic laws, which date back to 1979. That's when Ayatollah Khamenei founded Iran's Islamic Republic. And listen to this BBC report at the time.
There is undoubtedly genuine concern over exactly what is meant by an Islamic Republic. The most widely expressed fear is that it could well lead to the kind of repressive religious dictatorship that denies Iran the freedoms the revolution is supposed to have brought.
Those fears became real. Iranian women lost their right to choose how they dress. It was a freedom women had before 1979. It's a freedom some want now.
It's unclear where these protests are heading, but what's clear is that the relationship between the Iranian government and its society is completely broken down, and there's no going back from this point on.
The authorities insist all of this must stop, but there's no going back for this mother, whose son died in custody. She recently took off her hijab, declaring that the religion it stood for was killing people. And so, one woman's death has become about many women's lives. And they say there's no going back to how they used to live. The scale of interest in what's happening in Iran is vast, as it is with one video from the Communist Party Congress in China. It's been watched 12 million times and has people talking about the power dynamics at the very top of China's leadership.
Well, the first thing you notice from these incredible events at the Great Hall of the People is that China's former leader, when asked to leave, doesn't want to go. And you have to ask yourself, why? What's going on?
That question from the BBC's China correspondent Stephen McDonnell is one a lot of us have been asking. On Saturday, the scene was set as the Communist Party Congress drew to a close. Reporters had just been allowed in. There was President Xi, having consolidated his power. To his left was Hu Jintao, his predecessor. And then, in front of all of us watching, Hu Jintao was escorted out. Within minutes, the footage was going viral. Soon, Chinese state media reported Hu Jintao was not feeling well during the session, and that now he's much better. Certainly, as he seeks to take President Xi's notes, Hu Jintao appears confused. And he has been assisted before. This footage is from a week earlier. But some are questioning the official explanation. Global risk analyst Ian Bremmer says, why publicly humiliate former President Hu Jintao? He goes on, these are power politics on full display in Beijing. But being sure of any aspect of this is hard.
It can sometimes be very frustrating trying to work out what's happened. And even though this happened in front of foreign journalists, it was out of earshot and it was very difficult to assess. You literally have to try and pick over the fine details and do guesswork.
Then on Tuesday, more footage emerged, showing just before Hu Jintao was taken out. Mr. Hu goes to open a folder but is stopped. Now, we don't know what was in the folder. We do know that the new Central Committee had just been announced and that Mr. Hu's faction had been frozen out. And that's drawn the attention of the Chinese dissident and artist Ai Weiwei.
Those papers supposed to have the name of the new bureau circle of the Xi. And they must have some kind of deal before made. So, but now what the reality must be has a completely different reality.
At this stage, that's a theory, no more. But these power dynamics connect to why this moment matters. As the incident unfolds, Xi Jinping looks at the man to his right. This is Li Keqiang. He's one of Hu Jintao's protégés. He's been Chinese premier, second in command, for 10 years. This week, he found out he'll be losing that job. And as his mentor is removed, he stares forward, impassively. So too do the rest of the powerful standing committee. Whether intentional or not, the imagery is unavoidable.
The way Hu Jintao left the stage has been, is heavily symbolic of the demise of his faction.
And let's not forget, this all happened just when the cameras were allowed in.
These events are very heavily choreographed, and so for something like this to happen, there are questions about whether it happened by accident.
At this Congress, Xi Jinping definitely wanted the world to see these displays of unanimous support. Perhaps he wanted us to see this too. Either way, what we did see was a president with even greater power and an empty chair where his predecessor had been. Now, let's go back to UK politics, because Rishi Sunak's been clear. The UK economy, he says, faces profound challenges. And I want to look at one issue that he and others have raised this week: Brexit. As he took office on Tuesday, Rishi Sunak turned to the Conservatives' election manifesto of 2019.
I will deliver on its promise, building an economy that embraces the opportunities of Brexit.
Mr. Sunak wants to build the economy, but there's no shortage of people who say that Brexit isn't helping to do that.
Brexit is and was and will be a total disaster.
Brexit is doing the economy real damage.
Brexit, as negotiated, is frankly a disaster.
Rishi Sunak wouldn't agree that Brexit's a disaster, and however it's described, based on available evidence, this is what we know about Brexit and the economy. In 2020, then Prime Minister Boris Johnson agreed a trade deal with the EU, in which the UK left the single market and the customs union. Mr. Johnson saw it as
a deal which will, if anything, allow our companies and our exporters to do even more business with our European friends.
That's not happened yet. This is the non-partisan Institute for Fiscal Studies.
We've lost a large fraction of our trade with the European Union, including with high-value professional services trade. That's making us poorer.
Or there's the UK's trade as a whole. The Office for Budget Responsibility is the official body that provides independent economic analysis. It's concluded there's been a 15% reduction in trade intensity as a result of Brexit. It also released this data. The red line shows UK exports. Unlike other advanced economies, the UK's exports haven't bounced back after COVID. The OBR links this to Brexit. Now, Rishi Sunak's a long-time supporter of Brexit, as this campaign video released in the summer was keen to emphasise.
So there you have it, Rishi Sunak, a real Brexiteer from day one.
And months earlier, when still Chancellor, Mr Sunak was asked about the drop in trade.
It was always inevitable that if you changed the exact nature of your trading relationship with the EU, that was going to have an impact on trade flows.
This week, in a different way, this point was acknowledged by the man who negotiated Brexit for the UK, Lord Frost.
I've always said leaving the customs union and the single market has a cost. Not every Brexiteer has been willing to say that, but I have always said it. I don't think it's as big as many people say.
Now, Lord Frost and many Brexiteers would say that Brexit is about much more than the economy. It was about sovereignty, about taking back control. But the economy was part of it. This is Michael Gove in 2016.
The truth is that if we vote to leave, we'll be in an economically stronger position.
That also hasn't happened yet. Now, no doubt, resetting your trading relationship with the world takes time. There are already 71 new agreements with other countries, though most of them are direct copies of deals done when the UK was part of the EU. There are completely new deals with Japan, New Zealand and Australia. The Australia deal, for example, is estimated to increase the UK's GDP by 0.08% by 2035. Then there's India. The government said this week progress is being made, but there's no sign of a deal with the US. And if that's trade, next is business investment. It peaked in 2016, the year of the Brexit referendum. It's never returned to that level. Or there's the value of the pound. The strength of the dollar has lowered the value of currencies around the world, but the pound has fallen considerably against the dollar since 2016, and a weaker pound makes imported goods more expensive, which in turn has contributed to inflation. Put all of these factors together, and this is the Office for Budget Responsibility's conclusion. It forecasts that Brexit will reduce UK GDP by 4% over 15 years. And when faced with questions about the economy, ministers have pointed to international issues.
These are global pressures, these inflationary pressures, these energy price pressures are affecting economies, developed and developing economies right across the globe.
No doubt, the economic impacts of COVID and the war in Ukraine are considerable. The UK's economy has longer-term issues too. Since the 1970s, growth has gradually slowed, and since the global crash of 2008, productivity has stagnated. It's a complicated picture, but the OBR and many economists argue Brexit is part of it. For his part, Lord Frost says patience is required.
I think the whole British political system is going through a bit of a convulsion after Brexit. It's not surprising when you get this sort of huge change, and I think it's got some way to play out yet.
And as it plays out with a new Prime Minister in charge, Rishi Sunak has the chance to deliver the economic opportunities of Brexit that he's long promised. But based on available evidence, Brexit in its current form is one of the things constraining the growth of the UK's economy. And as we consider Rishi Sunak's first week at the helm, perhaps we can turn to a quote his predecessor wanted to share.
As the Roman philosopher Seneca wrote, "It's not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It's because we do not dare that they are difficult."
Of course, in Liz Truss's case, she dared and she made things more difficult. We can assume Rishi Sunak will be hoping to avoid that. Much harder will be to meet his promise to support the most vulnerable and to balance the books. Goodbye.